Hello, friends. Welcome to No Cap Room. My name is Dan Devine. I'm a senior NBA writer for Yahoo Sports. My podcast partner, Jake Fisher, is still out on vacation, which really, when you think about it, is just another way of saying he's running from the grind. That means that I'm still in charge and I still need somebody else to talk to. So that means we're welcoming in another esteemed and illustrious guest. Lucky enough today to be joined by a writer and broadcaster whose work has appeared in outlets like Sports Illustrated, the Philadelphia Inquirer, Boston Magazine, and The Ringer, where he hosted an NBA podcast called Heat Check featuring one great co-host named Haley O'Shaughnessy and one other one named Dan Devine. These days, you can hear him hosting The Lead Starting Five, Wondery Media's daily sports show, available wherever you get your podcast. He is my former colleague and a dear, dear friend. Ladies and gentlemen, John Gonzalez. Gonz, welcome to No Cap Room. How are you doing, brother?
What an introduction. I'll never live up to that. But buddy, wonderful to see your smiling face. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. But we're about to go from pleasure to pain, Gonz, because I've called you here today, not just to exchange compliments and see one another's smiling faces, but because while you're based in Los Angeles, you are unavoidably, for better for worse at heart, a Philadelphia guy. And the basketball team in Philadelphia, as you might have heard, is in the news this week. And you're not going to believe this, but it says here in my notes, it's for a reason that's not good.
Is it bad? Who would have guessed?
I know. It's hard to get to, hard to imagine. So let's get into it. And I will, you're going to enjoy this. In the rundown we have here, it says, news, James Harden, he's doing a thing, which felt to me like a very Gonz way of entering the topic. James Harden. The backstory, about 7 weeks ago, he picked up his $35.6 million player option, tying himself to the 76ers for one more year. Spoiler alert, then he immediately requested a trade, wanted to go to the Los Angeles Clippers, and he's not there. How far those negotiations ever got remains somewhat unclear, but this weekend, more movement. ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski reported Saturday that the Sixers were ending talks on a Harden deal, planned on bringing him back to training camp next month. That does not make him happy. Shortly thereafter, Sam Amick of The Athletic reports that the former MVP continues to not want to play in Philly, has no plans of taking part in training camp, which brings us to China. At an event in China. Inevitably, as all things do, brings us to China. And at an event in China over the weekend, as part of a promotional tour for Adidas, Harden went on the offensive, telling a crowd at the camp that, quote, Daryl Morey is a liar, and I will never be part of an organization he's part of. Let me say it again. Daryl Morey is a liar, and I will never be part of an organization he is a part of. First things first, Gonz. Because I woke up to that at like 7 o'clock. I'm getting my kids ready for summer camp. 4 o'clock on the West Coast for you. You wake up and you see the whole basketball world is talking about all this. What is your first thought?
Of course, it's about that time, right? It's that time. It's Sixers silly season. I want to go back though real quick. So the venue that he did this in, do you think that those kids in China were like, are we in the right spot? What's happening here? Because like they show up to see James Harden and all of a sudden he's like, I got some things to say. I'm going to get them off my chest first.
I thought we were going to be going on like our elbow and knee going up together in the layup. I thought we were going to be going over, thumbs going down on the chest pass.
You got to follow through on your form, the whole bit, how to draw a foul. And instead, you've got him besmirching a guy who, by the way, is one of the only people left in the NBA who's constantly going to bat for James Harden. I mean, let's not forget, the hug coming off the plane and they're reunited and it feels so good in the whole bit. And now all of a sudden, Daryl Morey's public enemy number one. I don't know. To your original point, what was my reaction? My reaction was, of course, because this is what happens with any other team in the NBA, with any other team in professional sports. This would be like a massive, massive deal where you go, I can't believe what's going on with that organization. With this organization, everybody goes, I can believe it.
Nothing could be more believable than to go through an offseason. And this is where we shout out our guy, Derek Bodner, who just went through the Sixers offseasons are undefeated. It's a wonderful tweet that stretches back to 2013. And it really is unbelievable to read it all laid out like that. From the start of the trading of Drew Holiday all the way down to now another point guard who wants to be traded.
He forgot one, by the way. He forgot the lottery pick that they traded Mikal Bridges for. His name's Zaire Smith, who then had a sesame allergy and almost died after losing like 25 pounds and never really played for them. So that's one that didn't make his list. But yeah, the list just goes on and on and on during the offseason where it's one disaster after another. And, this is the latest one.
And the natural sort of question, the immediate thing to come from it is, Daryl Morey is a liar. All right. So what is he lying about is kind of the next question. And most of the postmortems have sort of pointed at two potential answers. And maybe it's one, maybe it's the other, maybe it's both. I'm wondering, what do you think? Do you think this is more about the presumption of like the handshake deal last offseason where James Harden opted out of a $47.4 million deal, gets a 2-year, $68 million. So he takes like a $15 million haircut. And then, we're going to sign PJ Tucker. We're going to sign Daniel House, but we'll take care of you on the back end, which we should note just like officially league investigated that, didn't find any smoking gun there last summer. Enough to dock second round picks for the PJ and Daniel House deals, but not to punish on the Harden stuff. So it's either we're going to take care of you next year on a long-term deal, or if you opt in, then we'll get you moved. Like, well, if you opt into the deal, then we have some control of the process. We can we can move you. Which of those do you think is sort of driving the ship here, or is it both?
Marginally, I think it's the latter. The former, I have a problem with, and this has been pointed out by a lot of people. I think it's pretty easy to shoot down that, yes, he did take a haircut. He did allow them to go out and sign some other players. But let's not forget that in December, his camp was leaking, hey, we're going back to Houston. And that was something that was in the NBA zeitgeist being whispered into the Woj's ears and the Dan Devine ears and all the people who are plugged into the NBA. I'm not anymore, but you are. I know you heard it. Everybody's saying, oh, maybe he'll end up going back to the Rockets. So I have a hard time believing that he's upset with Daryl when his camp was sprinkling that out there as a possibility. This last one, okay, let's just say that he opts into the contract with the presumption that Daryl will try to get him moved. I think that that's probably a conversation they have, although I would bet that they have differing opinions on how that conversation went down, right? Because we're going to give you $35 million and change, and we're going to try to move you, but we're not going to trade you for spare parts because we think we could be a pretty good team with you. And oh, by the way, it doesn't seem like the market's going to give you that $35 million on your own. So you're going to get some money. We're going to try to trade you, but it's not going to be for nothing. And I think James Harden was just under the assumption that they're going to move me, full stop, period. And also, he made it harder on them by saying the only team he wanted to go to was the Clippers. Like, this is not complicated stuff. If you want to get moved, you need to drum up a market, and there should be more than one suitor. And instead, he cut the legs out from under the move that he wanted to happen.
Yeah, it goes back sort of what I was talking about this with J.E. Skeets a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the Dame situation. And it's like, the memo from the league saying like, we got to remind everybody, you can't just say, I'm not going to come to camp, I'm not going to play, and I only want to go to one place. Mm-hmm. This is really about the fig leaf. It's about the presentation of, well, there's a handful of teams you would go to. And even if you go down the list and say none of these make sense, it's obviously just trying to angle your way to one spot. Like, you have to at least present plausible deniability. And it's almost like everyone has just decided, I'm tired of all that. I don't want to deal with any of the other sort of rigmarole. I just let's do the main thing. I want to get the money that I want to get, and I want to get to the place I want to get to. And, later for all the pretend and the smoke and mirrors.
I wish he would get to the place he wants to go to. This would be much better for everybody. Like, James Harden doesn't want to be there. Please go. But now he's sort of forced their hand in this situation. And when the report came out the other day that the Sixers had decided to disengage from trade talks, and, Woj and some other people, Brian Windhorst, kind of reported that there weren't actually trade talks. It's kind of like everybody waiting for Dame to get traded. It's August. Nothing happens in the NBA in August unless it's something stupid with the Sixers. Everybody's on vacation. So when that report went down, I saw your tweet. And I want to give you credit here because you're like pretty much Nostradamus. You tweeted out, and I'm paraphrasing here, that this is the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. And that was before James Harden said what he said in China. So, like, it's really impressive that you can see the future. Can you tell me what happens with me? Do I lead a good life? But this doesn't end well for either side.
I think the person that was most pleased about that tweet was probably my wife, because I sent it while sitting in the driver's seat of the car after parking, following our children's birthday party. And she's like, can you get up here and help me? I'm like, hang on, I just got this Twitter joke. I got to write a joke about James Harden real quick.
I got to get this off real quick.
Yeah, no, it's gonna make Gons really happy. So you're going to be thrilled about it.
It did.
Well, I'm glad that it worked out that way. So yeah, I mean, go ahead. I think
I'm too close to this. I mean, I'm already getting worked up about it because, like, that's what we do in the offseason if you follow the Sixers. From people who cover the entirety of the NBA, Is it as absurd to you as it is to us? Because I think we've kind of gotten numb to it, but are you numb to it yet?
Meaning just like that you can kind of set your watch to something like this is going to happen.
Another bad thing will happen during this time.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm numb to it. I mean, maybe it's because I've just wound up having to write about pretty much all of them for the last decade. Starting with the Drew Holiday for Nerlens trade, where I thought I had to do a pre-write for Ball Don't Lie about Nerlens Noel being the number 1 pick. And then I was at the draft and then, oh, whoops. And also he's traded. And there was a lot of confusion. He's at the podium with the wrong hat on, the whole bit. So I'm familiar with the ups and downs and the twists and turns in it. I think at this point, it's the question, or from the national perspective, it's a little more like, where is the out, right? Because all of these other things, there's been some kind of either an escape hatch, or we can turn you. This guy could turn into that, or yes, things didn't go the right way with Jimmy Butler at the end of the day, or there was the question of, is it Jimmy Butler or Tobias Harris or however, but all right, there's a move to be made to, all right, it's going to pivot to Al Horford and Josh Richardson, and then we analyze where the turning point is. They're going to be different, and how is that going to work? And sort of there's always been something like that, and now it's sort of like, are we drawing dead? Or and the question is like, whereas the last time this happened, which was the Ben Simmons situation 2 summers ago, very similar set of circumstances, there was the sense of that Daryl Morey said, like, I'm not just going to trade away an all-star point guard for nothing. I'm going to wait until the market reveals something better. And the market revealed an unhappy James Harden in Brooklyn, and there was another way to go. And now you have, you mentioned the Clippers and the sense of like, there's no deadline. There's no heat under anybody. There's no sense that you've got to do it. So where is the disgruntled out? And if there's not one now, and the expectation is there's not going to be one until training camp or maybe into the season, where's the outcome for it? Like, it makes it a little bit harder to spot the landing, I suppose.
That's why I liked your tweet so much, because how do they get out of this? James Harden was posting on Instagram, it's time to get uncomfortable. Hey, buddy, uncomfortable is what we do in Philadelphia long before Daryl Morey showed up. And then Daryl Morey showed up and was like, this is the spot for me. They like to be uncomfortable. Look what happened with Ben Simmons. They drew the line in the sand. They were like, come on back to practice, guy. And he was like, he had a phone in his pocket. He was wearing sweatpants. I mean, like, how does this end?
So that's kind of the next step in all this, obviously, is, the Harden thing happens, whether it's tactical or emotional or some measure of both. And I think there's arguments on either side of it. It happens in large part because James Harden currently holds really no leverage in the situation. He has opted into his deal. He's with the Sixers for the next season, and then enters unrestricted free agency. He wants to get to a team that wants to sign him, bring him back, keep him long-term, that would hold his bird rights, be able to give him the richest, most lucrative possible long-term deal. In order to do that, he needs to effect a trade, because he can't just sit out. I wrote about a lot of this stuff earlier this week at Yahoo Sports. Sort of this is a measure of him trying to create some leverage by making things uncomfortable, as we know he wants to do.
People should read it. You're a good writer.
Oh, thank you very much.
I recommend it.
I appreciate that. But so there's the issue of, can you create leverage with somebody like Daryl Morey, who is going to say, I'm diamond handsing this whole thing. Like, there's no incentive for me to do anything.
Yeah. The leverage thing is really curious, right? Because, and it's not just it's all the things that you enumerated, but it's not just that too. There's others. Like, he's 33 going on 34. Mm-hmm. He's obviously slowed a step, taken a step back. He's not the same guy that we saw in Houston. He's certainly not the same guy that we saw even in OKC. And on top of that, this is now James Harden trying to work his way out of a third team in 4 years. And we saw what happened in Houston when he showed up in the fat suit, and then he goes to Brooklyn. And look, Brooklyn was a bad situation. There's no doubt about it. And like, that wasn't working because of Kyrie and a whole host of other reasons, but you did still have KD there. So it made me kind of wonder, like, what's going on there. Now he comes here. It's his guy. He goes to reunite with his guy. It's kumbaya. He's playing with last season's MVP. Your mileage may vary on that, but
Sure,
still
we'll get there.
technically
We'll get there.
last season's MVP. And now all of a sudden they're like, yes, we will give you more money. You're going to opt in. We'll give you more money. We'll figure it out. Maybe there'll be another extension. And instead he wants to just go. Okay, you want to go again. That's one thing. But to do this the way that he did it, just, I wonder what's left of his reputation to damage.
Yeah, it's a huge question because we're coming off of the like Hall of Fame ceremonies for some of the greats of this the previous generation: Dwayne Wade, Dirk Nowitzki, Pau Gasol, Tony Parker, guys, decorated players. But I think in terms of like individual statistical categories, with the exception of, I guess, Dirk being up in the top 6 in scoring, like Harden is, when you're going to stack up the basketball reference pages or whatever, you'll look at him and say like, well, that was one of the best offensive players of all time. Daryl famously made the argument that he was the best offensive player of all time. But even though we're in a position where James Harden is like a few healthy years away from maybe ending up in like the top 10 all time in scoring and assists, which the only other player there is LeBron, that doesn't feel like what we're going to talk about with James Harden when all's said and done. And maybe it's because of the, those guys that we just talked about, all those that went into the Hall of Fame have their postseason success stories, their championship runs, et cetera. And when Harden very famously does not have those, and is maybe, as he continues to scramble through these, year by year destinations looking for the place, the place that could deliver that, I find myself wondering, like, where this guy legitimately can make a claim to having revolutionized offense or offensive basketball. We talk about your mileage may vary. A lot of people don't like the ways in which he did it, but as like the on-court avatar for what Morey has always sort of preached about efficiency and which shots and layups and threes and the geography of the court and free throws and all that.
Right.
But we're going to talk about this guy at this stage for this feels, and maybe am I being a prisoner of the moment when I say that? Like, it feels like this is the stuff that's going to be the top line, not, 10-time All-Star MVP, whatever. It feels like this is what's going to show up.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. And, you mentioned his lack of postseason success. I think it's exacerbated by these things where people go like, what kind of teammate was he? What kind of hassle was he in an organization? I mean, here, a guy like Chris Paul, also a Hall of Famer, no doubt about it, an incredible individual player, hasn't had that postseason success that you would have otherwise anticipated given the talent that he has. He's also a little bit aggravating. He's also a little bit of a nudge.
Little bit.
But nobody's going to talk about Chris Paul like this. Everybody's going to go, man, Chris Paul was incredible. It sucks that he didn't win anything. Let's throw him in the Hall of Fame and fed him. With James Harden, it's going to be all this extracurricular, like, stuff that's always swirling around him. And like, generally I tend to enjoy that stuff, but there's a limit even for me. Like, at some point it's like, all right, man, like, you don't want to be there. Okay. They're trying to trade you right now is not a great time. Again, it's August and like, there's not a whole lot of activity. If anybody can get a deal done, I would expect it would be Daryl Morey. He ended up offloading Ben Simmons, who was constantly hurt and then completely useless. James Harden might not be the James Harden he used to be, but he's still James Harden. He's still really good. He had an incredible season last year. Talking about the assists and the way he was playing game, Doc asked him to change the way he played and really facilitate a lot more than he ever had. So he's still a good player. I don't understand what he thinks the end game is here for him, especially.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a very good chance that you have to remember sort of Harden's path through the last decade. And for almost all of it, it has been, I figure out what I want and I get it. Right. And maybe Daryl Morey, has to a certain degree been the facilitator of a lot of that. But it was, he gets the opportunity to be the number one guy in the max money in Houston. He gets Dwight Howard as the co-star. And then he's able to move off of that and he gets the team built around him. He gets Chris Paul when he wants Chris Paul. When he doesn't want Chris Paul anymore, he gets Russell Westbrook. When he doesn't want Russell Westbrook anymore, he gets his way to Brooklyn. He gets that trade happens, and then he gets his way to Brooklyn. When that doesn't go the way he wants, he gets his way to Philadelphia. And so there's always a lily pad for him, sort of a next stop. And so there's been essentially no consequences for whatever actions have come with it. And you wonder now, I mean, the point you made where it's about to be 34, and I looked this up when I wrote about Harden earlier in the summer, more minutes than anybody else in the NBA over the last 11 years, more than LeBron, more than Westbrook, more than anybody. Like, the workload is just, of course you lose a step, right?
Sure.
As you get with given what what he's had to shoulder and had to or chose to because of the way the offense was built, the high usage, all that kind of stuff. And so you look around and you say, where is the next team that's going to bend over backwards for him? And it seems like the only one he wants to go to, his preferred end game, is one that's saying, well, we have really no reason to do anything more than say, like, I don't know, the expiring contracts of Marcus Morris and Robert Covington. You guys love Cov. You love Rocco in Philly. Like, take him back, and then like a future second or something. Like, we're not even going to talk about Terrence Mann, guys. Like, and if that's the case, and Daryl is looking at it and saying it, as he said on the radio in Philly, if we can't turn James Harden into either a commensurate star or enough stuff to go get the commensurate star, then it's a no-go for us. So the only answer, it seems, is make things uncomfortable. And I don't know that when you say what's the end game for Harden, I think the end game for Harden is I'm going to get to Los Angeles kind of however I can get there.
And I guess good luck with that, because I don't believe that that's something that, I mean, you just outlined all the reasons why Daryl Morey isn't just going to do that. He's not just going to stick them on a plane and go, whatever they want to send back from LA, some In-N-Out Burger and Rocco, and we're good. It's not going to happen, because previously they were willing to just go, okay, well, if we're going to lose him in free agency, then we're going to lose him in free agency, and like, we'll just absorb that cap space, and won't that be nice? And we'll reallocate that next season or whatever. Once he opts in, that's it. I mean, like, okay, if you don't want to play, I guess don't play. But the whole uncomfortable thing is hilarious to me, because again, nobody does uncomfortable better than that organization and that city. And Daryl Morey, for all his faults, has been consistently one of the best general managers in basketball since 2006, when he ended up with the Rockets. I mean, like, he's just, obviously he loses trades and things of that nature, but he's one of a handful of general managers that I know there's a mind at work. I know there's a plan. He's not going to get his lunch eaten or taken. So he's sitting across from James Harden, and he's going to go, look, if something materializes that's beneficial, mutually even, wonderful, but we're not going to take a loss on this. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. I don't know.
It's reasonable. And I think the only thing that Harden has in his sort of back pocket, and then is, create an environment toxic enough, or make this so difficult to deal with that it becomes more reasonable to just wash your hands of it. The thing that it's made me think of a little bit is when Jimmy Butler wanted his way out of Minnesota, and like Tom Thibodeau loved Jimmy Butler, loves Jimmy Butler, will love Jimmy Butler forever. That's like his, on-court avatar soul partner. But he, even as everything was going up in flames, and as Jimmy was showing up and cutting the logo out of his shirt and waxing the starters with the third string, Tibbs was like, Jeff Teague told the amazing story on a podcast where it's like Tibbs' hand starts shaking because he was all excited about watching Jimmy perform. But even when that was happening, he was like, I don't want to let this guy go. I don't want to trade this guy. And only as like the organization was being burned down to cinders around him did he eventually assent to doing it and have to make the deal, oddly enough, with the Sixers.
Yeah.
But you want Daryl, to a very similar degree, whether there's the cold rational point of value wise, this I'm not going to be able to find the right deal, and I will not be able to find a deal that gets us closer to a championship or higher championship equity this season, or the emotional component of this is the guy who like made my career and changed my life, and I still believe in him and what he can be. So I'm not just going to give him up for 60 cents on the dollar. Like, something is going to have to radically change the calculus of Daryl Morey to affect the outcome that James Harden is looking for. And I'm a little bit concerned about what that might take. But it brings me to a sort of a point. We'll put a button on this and move on in the conversation afterward. But you are, we've talked a lot over the last several years, and one of the things that you say often is that you're here for the content. As a seasoned journalist as you are, you root for the story, and as somebody who likes jokes and things that are messy and hilarious, you also want big, colorful explosions when you can get them.
Sure.
Fireworks in the sky. This is that kind of summertime story, and it's the kind of summertime story that the Sixers have majored in over the years, but there's also been a lot of these with superstars over the years. My question as we go through this one, and I guess somewhat the Damian Lillard story as well, is this stuff good content anymore? Like, have we just seen enough of it that it's not even good anymore?
This is an excellent point. At some point, even I might have my fill. Like, I think that there's two components here. If we're talking about Dame and the league writ large, yes, still good. It's always going to be good, right? The NBA and the way the players move and the drama and all of that, the bright lights, is still exceptional. It's still my favorite league. The Sixers are a different component. The Sixers have been doing this, as we mentioned at the top of the show, for so long that, like, initially there was a novelty, and then it was something that we could get worked up about, and then it was just again, and that ties into this past postseason. It's not just the drama. It's what are you getting out of it? What are you wringing out of this dirty dish towel that's sopped up with all this nonsense and drama for years and years and years? And the answer is nothing. The answer is a second round out every season. And this past postseason, James Harden had that incredible game one, right? And like Embiid wasn't there. And like everybody's like, oh, this is maybe they're finally going to get through the second round. They're going to beat the Boston Celtics. Won't that be amazing? Shame on me, right? Because they fool you once. Okay. They fool you 200 times. You're an idiot. And what are you doing with your life? And after that game 7, where they completely no-showed, especially James Harden, I resolved to take a little break from this team because enough is enough, right? Like I need a timeout from these guys. Like it's Philly season. The Eagles are coming up. You see the jersey behind me. And I just figured I'm going to ignore everything that happens during the offseason. And here comes James Harden and Daryl Morey again to like kick open the door. So is it good anymore? No, it's kind of like, it's a little like the Fast and Furious franchise, which is also near and dear to my heart. I love them all. But this last one, you're like, did I need that? I probably didn't.
Now I'm just waiting for literally the door behind you. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see a door behind Guns. I'm waiting for Jason Momoa to come through, licking a knife, and then talking about trusting the process.
Kicking the door open.
It'd be pretty incredible. Like just a Aquaman Kool-Aid man. Yeah, it is a mess, and nobody does mess like Philadelphia. And we're going to take a quick break and come back, sort of zooming out from the mess to talk not just about the Harden situation, but the Sixers writ large and their best, most important, and biggest player. Welcome back to No Cap Room. We are joined by John Gonzalez, host of The Lead, Starting Five on Wondery Media, and we are talking about the Philadelphia 76ers. The last time that I hosted one of these a couple weeks ago, we talked with J.E. Skeets about the Toronto Raptors and kind of did like a big deep dive into the offseason, all the changes and who's there, who's not there. And it's a little bit trickier to talk about that in Philly because it's sort of a mess and also not much has dramatically changed. There's, out goes Doc Rivers, multiple 50-win seasons, multiple playoff berths, multiple second-round appearances, but not getting to the promised land where everybody hoped he would get to. In comes Nick Nurse, late of the Toronto Raptors. A very different style of coach, but also somebody who runs, has run his starters into the ground and been somewhat abrasive and famously had some tete-a-tetes with Embiid in the postseason. Out go George Niang, Jalen McDaniels, Shake Milton, rotation players, but not, among the top 5, top 6 guys on the team. In comes Patrick Beverley and Mo Bamba, which neat. Sure. We'll see. And no draft picks. So no infusion of young blood. Just running last year's team back minus Harden to you, John, puts the 76ers where in the East this season?
I don't know, mid-pack, right? Still a playoff team because you've got Embiid. Basically what they've been. Like we keep moving the deck chairs around the Titanic and expecting the boat not to sink. That's not what happens. Like the closest that they've gotten was that team with Jimmy Butler and JJ Redick, where they go up to Toronto against Nick Nurse's team. I was there. It takes an all-time Kawhi Leonard 4 bounce falling away shot, and they go on. And then, you and I go to Golden State and watch them beat Golden State on their floor. And we think that dynasty's over. And of course, they're resurrected, but that's as close as they got. That was their year. And it didn't work out. And then they jettisoned Jimmy Butler, obviously the wrong decision, whether or not it was going to be for Tobias Harris or even Ben Simmons, depending on which
whoever you were moving Jimmy to keep happy, bad idea.
Yeah, should have kept Jimmy, but that's as close as they've gotten. Every other season, it was an easy second round out. So whatever this team is, I expect they'll win a playoff series and then they'll get bounced again because that's what happens. Even James Harden or no James Harden. That's what this organization has become. And I know that we're going to get into the Embiid component, But like at some point, you got to wonder, like, if you're him, is this the spot for me?
Well, John, we're about to get into the Embiid component because I don't know if you noticed this, but Joel Embiid did the thing where he removed any mention of the Philadelphia 76ers from his Instagram and Twitter bios. And of course, that means war. It means, talk about the fireworks and the insanity.
Sure.
Embiid turns 30 in March. Big guys can age quickly. Big guys who have had injury history in the past, although who have been very healthy for the last several years and played at an unbelievable level, like the level that proves it was a good idea to do everything, or at least makes the argument that it was a good idea to do everything that the Sixers did for so long, because the whole goal of all of it was to get a guy this good. And here he is. And yet he has watched Jimmy Butler go out the door. That deal, as we mentioned, brings back Al Horford, Josh Richardson, and heartbreak. In the aftermath of that, he watches Jimmy go to the finals twice. And also they kind of play footsie over Instagram comments and things about how much they love each other and how much respect they have for each other. He's watched Ben Simmons traded for James Harden, which looked great in the moment and, looked really good on the court in a variety of ways. And it was nice to have a point guard who would shoot. But then, now here we are. And Embiid is saying, like, I still love James. That's my guy. I want him back. Wasn't at my wedding, but like, all right, whatever. He's,
right.
he's coming back. I want him back. And that does not seem to be in the cards. And, now he's watching Harden and Morey battle it out, which whatever the trade value might be, this does not seem to be adding to it, if nothing else. This leads to a number of a significant amount of speculation that like this is how it goes. This is how we get to the point where Joel Embiid asks out. I'm wondering how seriously at this point, the understanding that he's about to start an extension, like the extension he signed a couple summers ago, going to be paid supermax money for the next 4 years. How seriously do you think they have to take that threat at this point?
Very. I mean, before this whole James Harden thing went down, and I want to preface this. I'm going to preface this with, I love Joel Embiid. It is very, very difficult to get somebody of that caliber, right? I mean, like Absolutely. If you get a player that is that good, reigning MVP, again, depending on how you feel about that. Still, if he wasn't one last year, he was 2 or 3, but
and legitimately one of the 3 or 4 best players in the NBA for the last 3-4 years.
He's been incredible.
Yeah.
And he also fits perfectly with the city.
Right.
That said, and you could look at this from both perspectives, from Embiid looking out or all of us looking at Embiid. Where have they gotten? Right? I mean, they changed the coach, went to Doc from Brett Brown. I was a big Brett Brown fan. I thought that he did a lot for the organization, and then just when they were like climbing the mountain, they jettisoned him. But I get it. They changed the general manager multiple times. They changed all the supporting cast. I mean, everybody around him. Like the roster turnover, the one constant has been Joel Embiid. And what have they gotten for all of it? Nothing. Now, I'm not going to put that on Joel Embiid. I'm just saying that there's some people who are going to go, oh, well, maybe, it is time to move Joe. Or maybe Joe goes, it's time to move Joe. But either way, we could all probably arrive at the same conclusion. And I mentioned this to both of our friend, Mike Levin from the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast.
Thank you so much for saying the name. We have to make sure to say the name.
Always. Philadelphia's the world's preeminent Sixers podcast. But I said this to him after the Celtics series, that maybe it's time to detonate this thing. Maybe Joe wants to detonate it. Maybe the rest of us want to detonate it, but we keep butting our heads up against the exact same wall. And he's never going to have higher value than he does coming off of an MVP campaign before he turns 30. If he wanted out, I wouldn't blame him. And if they thought about it, I wouldn't blame him. It sucks, but this is where we are.
I mean, you look at the cupboard for refilling or retooling around him. And, we mentioned earlier the tampering investigation from last summer resulted in they're out a couple of second-round picks this year and next year. They owe first-round picks out to OKC in 2025 for Danny Green from that deal, offloading Horford, and to the Nets in 2027 for the Harden deal. There's just limited flexibility, with the exception of Daryl Morey has sort of lined things up where you have Harden's big expiring contract coming off the books this summer if he sticks around. you have, or if you turn him into expiring contracts of roughly the same value. They have not yet extended the rookie scale contract of Tyrese Maxey. And the explanation for that appears to be keep his lower cap hold on the books for next summer, where you could have Keith Smith at Spot Track projected them at about $33 million in cap space. And Daryl has said the idea is we think we'd be in a unique position where we'd be the only team as good as we are to have a lot of money to spend either in free agency, although you don't really see too many stars moving in free agency these days, or in trade to import a player there. And then, the names on the free agent market next summer, it depends on extensions and player options. But, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Drew Holiday, Klay Thompson, DeMar DeRozan, Pascal Siakam, there could wind up being at least some guys out there, and some of them might fit well next to Embiid. The issue is when you have now put Joel Embiid in a position 2 of the last 3 years and in the midst of like his absolute prime to say, just trust me, wait half a season without really any help, and we'll make this work probably. And at what point, maybe, at what point does that become a tiring thought process when you just watch the guy that you've been kind of like 1 and 1A with and, sparring for MVPs and Nikola Jokic going, with an organization that's been like well run and supportive around him, go win a championship. You wonder at what point Joel looks at that and says, what am I waiting for?
If I'm him, I'm already asking the question, because again, everything has changed, right? From Sam Hinkie, who could not be a bigger fan of Sam, through not 1, but 2 Colangelos, to then they didn't have a general manager. So it was Brett acting.
It was like the committee, right? Like
it was
the
board. Committee with Elton Brand. Then it was Elton. Right. Then it was can't be Elton. It's got to be Daryl. And again, I'm a huge fan of Daryl. Everything has changed, and they still are in that same spot. And it's the same. I mean, the characters change, but the plot remains the same. It ends up being this thing where they go to Home Depot and they buy all the rakes that Home Depot has. And then they lay them out around the building, and then they parade whoever the new person is in to step on all the rakes. And then everybody goes, oh, the Sixers look at them. This is embarrassing. If I was Joel Embiid, I'd go, look, it's been fun. I appreciate it, but maybe now is the time. And the Sixers, in reverse, I would be thinking about it too, because of what you just said. There's not a lot of flexibility anymore. Previously, with all these off-season disasters or drama or whatever, there was always one door that they could sneak out of, right? And now all of a sudden, okay, we've got some daylight and maybe it won't be that bad. I mean, they even managed to move Ben Simmons at a time when Ben Simmons' value could not be lower.
Right.
I don't see how they work themselves out of this. Even if they do offload James Harden, I don't think it's going to be for a ton. I don't know. Maybe Daryl Morey pulls another rabbit out of a hat. I'm a little dubious, but maybe. He's done it before. But then what? Does that get them? You asked me the question, where are they in the Eastern Conference? Let's say they either move James Harden or they get back a pretty good value for James Harden. Not James Harden, but something that they don't completely fall off the table. Are they getting out of the second round? They haven't yet. Do you like them better than the Celtics and the Bucks? I don't.
Yeah, it's hard to say, hard to argue that. I mean, beyond that, there's a burden of proof, right? Anybody past that, there, whether it's Miami, obviously the Dame situation is hanging over their heads, but they lost their whole starting backcourt and haven't really replaced them with anybody to this point. The Knicks, add Dante DiVincenzo, bring back Josh Hart, but that's still feels like, you'd need the burden of proof is on them to prove that they're like a 50+ win team as opposed to, 4 or 5 seed. Cleveland was a great net rating team that completely folded when they got punched in the mouth in the first round, but we'll see. And everybody else, it's kind of like wait and see the rest of the East. There's some quality building, like Indiana's going to be better. Orlando should be better. Brooklyn TBD with, how the revamped version of them with Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and everybody, how that goes. But
can I stop you right there?
Go ahead.
I want to stop you on Brooklyn. Move it from this season moving forward. Would you rather have Brooklyn and all their assets and all their young players and like none of the drama and like their situation where they have a ton of flexibility? Or would you rather have the Sixers situation?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of pathways and outs, I think, the horizon is a little sunnier for Brooklyn.
Ascendant Mikal Bridges and like let's see what this could be.
Yeah, and you sort of have the bets on the future stuff of like it's Philly's first round pick in a couple of years. There's the Brooklyn or the Phoenix picks after the Durant deal. You know, there's you get the incoming picks from Dallas and the Kyrie deal. Like there's a few different pathways to something working out positively for you. And plus, you know, we talked about the guys that they brought in. There's also you can flip Dorian Finney-Smith for something, or Spencer Dinwiddie for something, or whatever. You know, there's ways to make it work. And it's funny because it's like in talking about Brooklyn's life cycle, and Philly's life cycle, it's not exactly 1-to-1, but the Sixers were on the treadmill of mediocrity for however long and decided to do something sort of drastic and dramatic to try to find the superstar that gets them where they were. The Nets were put themselves in an absolutely disastrous situation with the trade that they made with the Celtics. To send out bring in Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce and send out the picks that wound up becoming Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And then they have to build back from nothing. And so they go from the sewer to respectability. And then they've got the shot at the superstar. The Sixers go from the sewer and then they get the shot at the superstar and they build and develop the superstar. Things go haywire in Brooklyn and it doesn't work out. And now they're back to like scrappy, fun team that doesn't have the major expectations. Philly now has the superstar and everything sort of seems like it's not really supporting around it. When does the Ferris wheel turn for them? Which brings me as a thing that I'm not sure if I've said before on this podcast. I know I've said it before. Our mutual friend, Paul Flannery, who loves to talk about that the best time you can have in the NBA is right before you get good. And because once you're good and once you show that you're good, there's expectations and there's pressure and there's something on the line. And so the Nets right now are back to, hey, look, our picks could turn into anything. We could navigate our way to being pretty good, and maybe then we get a star too. Who knows? And it's like, but you're going. It's like the circle of life for these teams that want to compete and contend, and who have never been to the top of the mountain, or who can't keep themselves there consistently. And now Philly, it feels like you wonder if they're getting closer to the Ferris wheel moving around for them too.
I mean, to the extent that they were even close to the top of the mountain. That's why I say it felt like a false summit this entire time. And Flan is one of our dear friends, but also a very smart man, because he's right. Thinking back on the process era, you know, academically, all of us who were on board with what Sam Hinkie was doing, it made
the
sense,
premise
right?
of the idea, right?
The off season was the actual season.
Right.
Nobody I covered those teams. I was in Philadelphia for, 10-win seasons when, Brett Brown's welcoming guys that like he just shakes their hand and goes, "You're playing tonight. I don't know your name, but good luck." Like that was brutal basketball, but the offseason was the thing. And then they tick up and all of a sudden, like you see the promise of Embiid. He's out on the floor, they get JJ Redick, and then all of a sudden they've got 50 wins out of nowhere and people are excited about it. And then that was like kind of the zenith, the like we said, that Toronto series was the high point. And everybody thought, oh, well, if they win that game, they could have won their championship. And like, then what happens to that team? But they didn't. And that was as good as it ever got. And I'm very, very skeptical that it will be better with this group. I really am. Two things. First off, that makes me think of The Sopranos when it's like Christopher Moltisanti says, like, do you ever think that nothing good is ever going to happen to you? And Paulie Walnuts is like, yeah, and it never did. So what? Yeah, that's about right. It's the Philadelphia experience. By Chris
right. Yeah, it's neighborhood play in Jersey.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask you we're going to walk it back one step because you said I'm skeptical and I'm not optimistic. We're going to try to affect optimism. You know me, Gonz. I'm a very positive person, not overly self-critical, not overly pessimistic. We're going to look for the sunshine here.
Yes.
One thing, while it never got better than that, that Jimmy team, this is also a team that was a quarter away from putting away the Celtics on their home court. Like this, this was a game 6. They were up 10 points.
Yeah,
and
remind me how that ended up.
We're gonna elide that part. We're gonna yada yada that part at the ending. But they were arm's reach, hands around a Eastern Conference Finals trip with Embiid. And even though we said like Embiid is not you don't put it all at Embiid's feet, but Embiid has not lived up to MVP billing in the postseason, has yet to 100%. Do it. But Embiid is that guy, right? Everything is premised on Embiid being that guy. Tyrese Maxey continues to grow and to develop. There was enough of a nucleus there and enough compelling two-way basketball there to get to within arm's reach of the conference final. So I'm going to ask, now that we've been doom and gloom for 50 minutes, find me a silver lining to where we are right now. If you're a Sixers fan, and we've talked about our friends at the Ricky, and to the point where like the New York Times, Sopan Deb of the New York Times, shouts out to him, wrote a story about like where the Sixers are now, and it's quoting like, the fans are just basically ready for open revolt because of how things have gone. If we were trying to find a look on the bright side of life to this team as it exists going into the season, what would it be?
I want to start by saying only 50 minutes of doom and gloom. I would have gone over. Had you set an over under before the show started. Sure. I mean, like there are positive points individually, right? I mean, like Joel Embiid is a huge bright spot. Look, in the postseason, did he look like Nikola Jokic? No. I mean, like that's part of why people were like, oh, was he actually the MVP? Because Jokic went out and had like an all-time mind-blowing postseason and dominated, and they won a championship. And like he looked every bit as good as he's always been advertised. Joe I don't want to say takes games off or series off or whatever, but there are flashes when he looks exactly as good as an MVP. And then there are moments when you go, oh, he just fell over and dribbled the ball off his foot. What happened there?
Right.
Like it's game 6 and game 7. It's go time. Like we need you to put the team on your back. But still, on the whole, huge positive. Tyrese Maxey, you outlined, huge positive. I mean, like perfect fit for the city. Everybody loves him. Really, like by all accounts, like just a good teammate and a good kid, and like sky's the limit. And also he's on a great contract, as you mentioned. And then Daryl Morey. I mean, as a general manager, I trust his brain. There's a huge mind at work there. We've seen it do really remarkable things previously. And, they swap out Doc for Nick Nurse. And I think that's, probably an upgrade. I wasn't as big a Doc hater as a lot of people were. I think that he probably fell into that. I've said this a million times, probably with you too. I think they're probably like a handful of coaches at the top of the league that you go, man, they're better than everybody. And then like a handful at the bottom where you wouldn't want any part of them. And then they're the guys in the middle. And Doc's one of the guys in the middle. But maybe Nick is slightly up in the middle from him. I don't know. Did I forget anything? It's not a lot.
Tobias Harris bounce back season.
I mean,
we'll see if PJ Tucker's hand is alive this year. I don't know.
That contract is not Toby's fault. He gets a lot of heat for it. Before Tobias Harris got a contract like that, back in the day, Andre Iguodala got a contract like that and he used to get killed for it. And I'm like, he's still the best player on the team. They paid him like it. Like, it's not his fault. You'd take the money. I'd take the money. You could do worse than Tobias Harris, but yes, he's probably not producing at a level commensurate with the money.
Sure. Yes, that's right. I think the main one to point to, as you said it, it's if we work out a scenario where whether James Harden is like holding out or not playing or been sent home or whatever, or he gets moved, if that transitions the ball more into the hands of Tyrese Maxey, he has, grown in leaps and bounds each season, but he has also been playing an off-ball role for most of it. And so the question is like, what does it look like if he's the one running 30 pick and rolls with Embiid every game as opposed to Harden? That's at least, there's a growth opportunity. There's an unknown to sort of, there's green grass to run into on that one. And given how positive the returns have been on everything he's been asked to do so far, I think you could at least have some level of optimism about this could be the guy that, there's maybe even more, sort of left in the jar to pour out and to get out of him to create something for us here. Before, with that being somebody that's worth a max extension that you want to have being in the 2-man game with Embiid for however long, that's something. But I will grant
marks for Maxey.
Yeah, I will grant that is, if accessing that is like, well, we traded James Harden for, with all due respect to any names that are going to come up here, like Norm Powell and Covington and, Brandon Boston Jr. in a couple of seconds, like that's not getting you where you want to be. It might make the vibes a little bit better, but it's not necessarily getting you where you want to be. But also, not for nothing, that question, if the result of this is not, Daryl talks so often about like when people talk about Daryl, they talk about that, percentage chance of winning a championship, we're within the margin of error for yada, yada, yada. If a deal for Harden doesn't improve that, but makes everything feel less shitty, is that Is that a win? Like from a fan perspective component, like would you settle for that at this point?
Maybe. I mean, like that's kind of a vibes question.
Yeah.
But as we've seen with the Philadelphia 76ers over the years, the vibes tend to end up at the same spot, right? Like you could, you stick the ping pong balls in the hopper and you turn it around and you pull it out and you're still hitting the same number. I mean, we end up in the same spot. So like you move, Ben Simmons, the vibes are so bad. If we move Ben Simmons, it's going to be great. Turns out, maybe not, like Jimmy Butler, he's clashing with Brett or he's clashing with Ben Simmons. He's going to be the problem. Move him off. It'll be great. Maybe not. So I just, again, remain skeptical. It's the Philadelphian in me that somehow, it's addition by subtraction by moving Harden. But the real underlying point here is you probably end up in the same spot with or without him. Vibes wise and also results wise. This is keep him, don't keep him. Doesn't matter to me. I don't see them getting out of the second round again. At which point you ask yourself, yes, I get what Daryl's saying about the percentage chance. And I get what you're saying about, you're within fingertips of like an Eastern Conference appearance, right? Finals appearance. You're so close.
If you're one of the last 4 teams standing, that's not nothing. There's a lot of teams in the league that never get there.
But what kind of something is it? Because I've been living that something. They've been living that something. You got a whole city living that something. I wonder what it's worth. That percentage chance that he's talking about, I understand it academically, but I go back to my guy at the beginning, Sam Hinkie. He had a percentage chance when he took over that team with Drew Holiday and I forget who else he jettisoned at the time. And he goes, okay, I was at the game 7 in Boston with Drew Holiday and Andre Iguodala and Evan Turner and Spencer Hawes and all those guys, right? And they lost. Of course they lost. They weren't going to win that game. But they were close. Oh, isn't that something? Sam looked at it and went, not really. That's kind of how I look at it. Not really.
I get that. And I think which was the entire impetus behind we're going to radically reshape the way that an organization approaches the draft and our odds. But I do wonder now, and maybe, you have been close to it in a lot of ways and maybe too close to it in some capacities where I wonder if, from a fan perspective, it's like after a decade of that, if just having a team that you didn't feel like you had to, cover your eyes every offseason, if that would be worth it to like just be normal would be, a marked improvement. Speaking as a Knicks fan, growing up and through the years, like just be normal was like, has been a pretty significant, of course, now I say that like lightning bolts are going to start coming down from the sky. Yeah. Dolan just woke up, but it's going to be like the idea of what if you have, maybe instead of 5% chance, a 4% chance or whatever, but it's less insane all the time.
There's something to be said for that. I do consider it, because on the one hand, just be normal and God, they're annoying the hell out of me again. And, it's not just the off season, right? It's not just like the endless drama in the off season. Then the postseason rolls around and, I go through a whole season where I'm like, I'm not sure about this team. Then they get into the playoffs and I'm like, maybe this is the year, right? They convince me again. And then they pull the rug out and I'm like Charlie Brown with the football. And I just never realized that Lucy's never going to let me kick it. The flip side is they're not boring.
That's true.
Right now I've had enough, right? I'm coming off of the postseason again. They're doing this again. I'm like, I don't need this in my life. They're aggravating as hell, whatever, but they're not boring. It's not like being a fan of the Charlotte Hornets or something where you're just like in constant purgatory. Like that would suck. For all of their faults, even when they were the worst team in the NBA and maybe the worst team in all of sports and maybe the worst team in all of sports ever, they were not boring. So there's something to say, like that's what goes back to what you always say with me with the content component, right? Yes, sports is trying to win a championship and all this, but at its base level, when you really strip it down for parts, it's entertainment.
Yes.
Right? If it wasn't entertaining to any of us, none of us, people wouldn't be listening to your podcast. We wouldn't be on League Pass, sweating games and whatever, right? We wouldn't be watching football on the weekends. They're not boring. I'll say that about them.
You can certainly argue that. All right, we'll get you out of here on this, Gons. I asked Skeets a similar question when we were talking about the Raptors. We're going to go into like the pretend sandbox mirror dimension,
alternate
reality. We're in the multiverse now.
Okay,
and
I like it.
in this component,
There's
Daryl
another
Morey,
Sixers team out there somewhere.
there's endless
Shoot me.
endless Sixers teams. On some of them, Bynum actually worked out. Evan Turner started making those threes.
Hinkey's living his best life. He's GM of the year 5 times running.
Exactly right. He got the longest view in the room, and it continues to extend out into infinity. All right. So in this one though, in this dimension, Daryl Morey is no longer has the reins of the Philadelphia 76ers. And, whether it's because he is, there's a mutual parting of ways, he resigns because he doesn't want to deal with the rebuild, he's fired for whatever reason, he's no longer in charge. You know who is in charge? Who is the new president of basketball operations for the Philadelphia 76ers? This guy named John Gonzalez. And he's got some great ideas, I've heard. He's got some great ideas. I've heard he's a super optimist about the way that this organization can go. And I'm wondering what that guy sees as job number one to sort of fix, and what's move number one or job number one, idea number one to, move things in the right direction for the Philadelphia 76ers.
I'm going to check the cabinets, see if he left a bottle behind, unscrew that thing. You know what? I knew that you were going to ask this because we talked about the things that we were going through, and it really is a fork in the road where they are right now, right? It is stay the course. It's hard to get somebody like Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey's in, you just hired Nurse. That's the road they're going to go. That's the road that's tempting to me for a lot of reasons, because for all of my negativity and skepticism and all the doubts that I have, like there is that percentage chance, right? I get why they talk about it.
Yeah, like maybe this is the Embiid year, the one where it actually goes through May and June.
Right. So, that's the safe route too. But if I'm being truly honest with myself.
And we are in a mirror dimension, man. It's going to come back on you now.
I don't believe that this will be the year. I don't believe that next year will be the year with this group. So if I were a bold executive who had guts a la a Sam Hinkie, I'd blow it up probably. I would go, look, we have one guy who can net a huge return and his value is never going to be higher. And that would be so incredibly painful. And it would take more courage than I have. Like, were I actually in Daryl Morey's shoes, I would take the Daryl Morey path. That's the easy path, and you hope for the best. But academically, just really taking all of like the passion and the heart out of it and just looking at the numbers, I think we know what this is. And I don't think it's going to change.
Well,
what would you do?
In that mirror dimension, I'm running the Knicks and I'm saying, all right, so Julius Randle, Emmanuel Quickly, let's figure out, the upcoming Hornets and picks and whoever. All right, let's get Joe over here in Manhattan. Let's see if we can make something work.
Oh, that's what we're getting back. All of a sudden, I'm sticking with Joe.
I don't blame you. Oh, well, I don't blame you. I do thank you. I'm so grateful, Gons, that you came on the show today. It means the world to me that you would do it, and also that we had somebody to commiserate with all this Philly stuff. With Jake out, Jake is out of the country while Philly stuff is exploding. I'm sure the Philly friends group chat that he talks about all the time is costing him immeasurable amounts of money as he's overseas traveling and roaming. But I appreciate you coming in to ably fill in the spot of a Philly guy talking about this stuff.
I have known Jake since he was a kid.
He's still a kid, by the way.
Merely a columnist at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and he was on the come up. And I got to tell you, I knew then he was smart. He timed this. He goes off. He doesn't have to deal with any of this nonsense. However, I am thrilled to see your smiling face. It is always wonderful to talk basketball with you. And let me say, what a host you are.
Oh, stop it.
Back when we did the show together at the other place, I had to move the ball around. And I'm telling you, buddy, I mean, you killed this show. What a professional job you are. I got to say to the executives at Yahoo, give him a raise. Keep him locked down. You don't want him pulling a James Harden and trying to go somewhere else.
Thank God we're still in the mirror dimension and nobody's listening. Yeah. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of No Cap Room. Thank you again to John Gonzalez for being so generous with his time and experience. Gonz, anything you would like to plug on your way out the door? Where can people keep up with your work?
You can listen to The Lead Starting Five anywhere where you get your podcast. It's a daily table setter, some fun stuff. We usually have a mix of news and serious stuff. And then like at the end, we'll have something fun that we can goof on. It's a really fun show. We work with great people. So check it out if you're so inclined.
please do make sure you rate, review, and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, wherever you're listening to this one. And please remember to do all of those things for us. Subscribe to Ball Don't Lie on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you're currently listening on. Leave us a 5-star review. Say something nice about how good I look and how well I do, just like Gonz did. Thanks so much to John Gennaro for doing everything that he does to make the show look and sound great week after week. Vinny Goodwill will be back next week with another episode of Good Word with Goodwill. And get excited, friends. 2 weeks from that, or from now, after Vinny's show next week, Jake should be back. Provided no issues in international waters, provide he's able to get through customs, no problem. Jake should be back in a couple of weeks to bump me out of the seat that I've usurped and put me back in my place. But we'll wait on, have to see about that. We thank you so much for listening to us. We'd appreciate it if you'd come back again next week for another episode of No Cap Room.